Hello, my name is Jason, and today I have got you a new math problem. The problem says that at Hope Middle School, Mr. I, Mr. Love, and Mr. Problems teach science, mathematics, and history, but not necessarily in that order. The history teacher, who was an only child, has the least experience. Mr. Problems, who married Mr. I's sister, has more experience than the science teacher, who teaches science. So to solve these kind of logical reasoning problems, we have two ways of doing it. The first way is by making a graph, and the second way is called dotted and solid lines. We'll start by doing the first way since it's relatively easier to do and understand than the second way. So since there are 3 people and 3 subjects, we make a 3 by 3 graph. I'll quickly make my graph. And there we go. Now, since there are 3 teachers, we write their names. So for Mr. I write E, Mr. Love is L, and Mr. Problems is P. For the subjects, S for science, M for mathematics, and H for history. So now we read the first clue. The history teacher, who was an only child, has the least experience. That doesn't give us any help about who teaches what. So now we read the second clue. Mr. Problems, who married Mr. I's sister, has more experience than the science teacher. That was more helpful than the first one, since it said Mr. Problems has more experience than the science teacher. And he can't have more experience than himself, so that means that he's not the science teacher. So we cross it out here on the science teacher. And then if we combine the first 2 clues together, we can see that the history teacher was an only child. But Mr. Problems married Mr. I's sister, so Mr. I have a sister, so he's not an only child. So Mr. I is not the history teacher. We also cross that out. And since Mr. Problems has more experience than the science teacher, that means he have more experience than someone, so he don't have the least experience. So he's not the history teacher. And now we're sure that he's a math teacher, we put a check here. And since no one else could be the math teacher, we cross out all the other boxes in the math row. Now back to the first clue. The history teacher was an only child and has the least experience. And since Mr. Love is the only one left that can be the history teacher, he'll be the history teacher, so we put a check here, and he can't be any more jobs, so we cross out science. And now we know that Mr. I is a science teacher because it's the only option left for him. And since a question asked for who teaches science, that means Mr. I teaches science, so the answer should be Mr. I. So that's the first way of doing it. And the second way is pretty similar to the first way, except you're just showing your work in a different way. So in different cases, you can use the different methods. So for example, like if the number is really big, you need to use the second way. And if the number is not that big, the first way will be better. So now the second way, once again, there's 3 people and 3 subjects. So in this way, we write out the people's names. I love problems and science, math, and history. history. There. So since it's basically the same logic, we go to the first clue. The history teacher was an only child and has the least experience. Once again, that doesn't give us any help. So we go to the second clue. Mr. Problems, who married Mr. I's sister, has more experience than the science teacher. So like this, we know that Mr. Problems is not the science teacher. So since he's not, we draw a dotted line. And then, combining the first and second clue, the history teacher has the least experience and Mr. Problems has more experience than the science teacher. That means Mr. Problems can't have the least experience. So he's not the history teacher. Since math is the only option left, we draw a straight line to Mr. Problems. And now, so it also says that the history teacher was an only child and Mr. I have a sister. So Mr. I is not the history teacher. So that makes him the science teacher. And now Mr. Love only have one option left, and that's a history teacher. So we draw a solid line to the history teacher. And once again, it asks for who teaches science, so we still get the same answer, Mr. I, since there's a solid line here to science. So basically, in the first method, you make a grid and you cross out the 100% impossible choices and you check the choices you're sure of. In the second method, you write one kind of thing on the top row and the other kind of thing on the bottom row. And then with dotted and solid lines, you represent if it's true or not. A dotted line means it's not true, and a solid line means it's true. So basically, these are the two methods that you can use for these kind of logical reasoning problems. Thank you for listening.